the jwforwardcast, the podcast that helps former Jehovah's Witnesses pick up the pieces, put them back together, and turn them into something awesome. So how's everyone been? I hope you've had a good month. My month has been good but busy. I've been travelling a lot, travelling for holiday, I've been travelling for work, and now I'm back home for a short while, but there will be more moving around and travelling. I don't actually mind. I quite enjoy travelling. I think I'm quite a restless person. But I could definitely do with a bit of a break, I think, before I see another airport, especially in a work context, because the thing with travelling for work is you think in your head, oh, this is brilliant, I'll be going to these places, I get to explore all these interesting cities and locations, and the company will pay for it. What actually happens is you fly from the airport to another airport, then get a taxi to the hotel, then a taxi to the office, and you cycle back and forth between office and hotel, and then you fly home. So you don't always get a chance to look around. Sometimes you do, but yeah, it's not always as glamorous as you were hoping for, and it's usually a lot more exhausting than you thought it would be. But other than that, I've been having a pretty good month. I've also been attacked with swords this month, which is fun. Wait a second, you're saying, what do you mean attacked with swords? Well, I'll leave you hanging on that. We'll come back to that later. But first, a little housekeeping. So, first of all, I'd like to give a big ForwardCast shout-out to a new Patreon supporter. Brace yourself for a terrible accent. A big shout-out to Y'all Ain't Right. Did I get that correct? I've tried to get a southern accent into there. I've been assured that's kind of a southern colloquialism of saying someone's a bit crazy. Hey man, y'all ain't right there. This is a terrible southern accent, and I do apologize from the bottom of my heart. I've been trying to watch the TV show Justified to get a bit of Appalachian twang to my voice, but in fact, are the Appalachians even in Georgia? You know what, I'm apologising ahead of time now for all the people in the South that I've offended, the people in Georgia that I've offended, and the people in the Appalachians, because I don't know if the mountains are in Georgia. My ignorance is shining through here. But yes, a big shout out to that patron supporter. And yeah, apparently saying y'all ain't right is a way of saying you're a little bit crazy. And you know what? Yeah, we are all a little bit crazy in our own way, aren't we? So, yeah, big thank you. And if you'd like to become a patron of the ForwardCast, get a shout-out on the show and access to lots of other cool rewards, such as Ask Me Anything episodes, episodes of the Patreon exclusive show, the Covert Files, handwritten thank you cards from me, film commentaries from myself and Alice Cheshire. We sit down and watch the film Apostasy back to back and give our commentary as we go. You can get hold of all of that on Patreon/Covert Fade. And a big thank you to all our current supporters, and also to our supporters who have to remain anonymous, because like me, if their name actually came out, they would be shunned. So I always ask people's permission first before I give them a shout out. But a big shout out to our anonymous supporters as well. Something else I want to mention is the iTunes reviews for the show. Another way you can support the show, if you found it useful, is to go over to iTunes and give us a star rating, which you can literally, if you've got the podcast app in front of you, you can just scroll to the show and you've got an option to give it a rating of 1 to 5 stars. We currently have 11 ratings, so maybe we can boost that up to 12 for the next show. We also have 4 written reviews on iTunes where people have left actual written reviews of the show, which again is really helpful, and thank you so much for that. And if people leave any new reviews before we record the next episode, I will read those reviews out on the next episode of the show to say thank you. And the reason why these are important is that the podcast algorithm on the Apple iTunes store promotes podcasts that have high reviews and that have a lot of written reviews. So it's a great way to help more people find the show. So it'd be great if you could help us out that way. So I mentioned getting attacked with swords. I'm being serious. I have started to practice HEMA, HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts. I got invited to go, basically, by one of my housemates who was curious about it and wanted to go. And I've always been curious about doing it, but I've never had the chance to get involved. And it's kind of part archaeology, part martial arts, because you think to yourself, well, how do we know how people used to fight with swords in like the 13th and 14th centuries? Well, turns out there's a lot of surviving manuscripts, and there are kind of like archaeological records of the way people used to use swords. And what they've done is they've studied these texts and then put it all into action. And because obviously sometimes it's unclear as to actually what the texts mean. Well, a great way to find that out is to literally start fighting and find out. So what ends up happening is you're going to something that's part history lesson and part combat sport, and you get padded up. You get your fencing mask on. Someone's banging on my door. It might be happening above me. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. And you get your fencing mask, and you get your padded gloves, and you get your either hard plastic sword, or you can actually use blunt steel swords for more advanced students. What happens so far is the session is you get shown a couple of techniques to practice, then you all partner up and you practice those techniques. And I've been also doing it. Apparently there isn't sparring at this class, but apparently they do proper sparring once you get more further along. So yeah, I've been literally learning to get medieval on your ass. The only thing that I'm worried about is that I'll start looking at movie sword fights that I really love and start seeing all the mistakes, or start being a kind of person who go, no, you know what, you wouldn't actually do that in real life, and I'll become one of those infuriating people. It's already happened a little bit now, when I'm kind of like watching something that involves any kind of ground fighting for Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or any kind of knife fighting on movies with like Filipino Kali, or anything like that. I'm sort of seeing all the mistakes and things you wouldn't really do, but they're things that the actors, they have to do in the fight choreography, otherwise the fight's over in 10 seconds. And that's one thing with movie sword fights, is movie sword fights will go on for ages, whereas in reality a real sword fight's probably over in like 10 seconds. You know, you're in, you're done. But that doesn't make for a very interesting fight scene for a movie. So yeah, I suppose there's an element of suspending disbelief, which you have to bring into it. But anyway, so yeah, that's my that's my interesting sword fighting story, and I'll let you know how that goes. I just hope I don't get skywalkered or something and lose a hand. My guest today is Sean Holland, probably better known by his stage name, Alexander Rhodes. Shawn has been a club DJ, he's been a music producer, he's a poet, and he's also a spoken word performer, and he's currently touring his one-man show, 1 Foot in the Rave. And 1 Foot in the Rave is incredibly successful, and it deals with a pivotal moment in his life, because Shawn also used to be a Jehovah's Witness. And the show zeroes in on a key moment in his life that kind of, when he was going down a very bad part of, down a very bad path, it was a moment in his life that kind of reset him and it enabled him to bounce back again. So we talk about that. We actually talk about a wide range of things, from his growing up as a witness, his decision to leave, life in the 90s clubbing scene in the UK. We talk about poetry, spoken word, art. It's a really interesting show. Oh, and by the way, if you think this month's episode sounds even better than usual, that's because Shawn actually helped me out a bit with the audio production. Turns out that working with someone who's an experienced audio engineer and music producer has some audio benefits as well. So thanks, Shawn, for making this particular episode of the podcast sound just that little bit better than usual. My guest today is Sean Holland, also known by his stage name Alexander Rhodes. Shawn is a poet, he's a DJ, he's a creative writer and a performance artist whose current show, 1 Foot in the Rave, is touring the UK. 1 Foot in the Rave is described in the following ways in the press pack. A disillusioned 23-year-old evangelist preacher finds himself ejected from a controlling cult and onto the ecstasy-fueled dance floors of 90s clubland. He is not prepared for what he finds. That sounds like a heck of a story. Sean Holland, welcome to the ForwardCast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
Cool. No, thank you for coming on, especially as I understand you've had dental surgery relatively recently, so we may or may not lose you halfway through, depending on the
Yeah, if it goes silent, it's because I've keeled over. Yeah, I had a traumatic tooth extraction this morning.
Cool. Well, thanks for soldiering on like a trooper, and hopefully we can get this done without you passing out. So. Cool. So there's lots I wanted to talk to you about, because you've got a really interesting story to tell. In fact, it's so interesting you've actually been able to turn it into a one-man show, which is touring at the moment, called One Foot in the Rave. And so what I thought we could do is there's loads I want to talk to you about, because you've been a DJ, you're currently forming creative works and working creatively. And your story, I think many people would relate to, especially from the exJW world, because leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses is usually pretty traumatic to some form or another. And I know that you've been able to kind of take that experience of leaving and sort of focus your creative energies on it and almost turn it into something positive and something that let people look at their own lens and their own issues that they deal with. Could you just give us maybe like a quick overview of sort of what your life was like as a Jehovah's Witness and what it was like to leave?
Yeah, of course. It's taken a long time to get to this point, really. I was under 10 when my parents became Jehovah's Witnesses, and therefore, there was quite a quick flip there from what might be considered, a normal life, whatever that is. I know that's relative, into this new way of living. It was kind of... although, I'm 51 now, so this is, I'm going back quite a long way. But, it was almost a case of one day coming home from school and being sat down and told, okay, there's going to be no Christmas this year, and we're going to be starting a thing called a Bible study. And, it was literally like that kind of transition. There was no warning that this thing was building up. And I think that was because my father was having a Bible study in secret for quite a while before actually announcing to the family that this is now what we're doing. Okay. So for me and my siblings, it was like kind of instantaneous. We're doing this now. Get on board with it. So that was strange. I'm probably sure that most families don't go in that way. There's probably kind of a gentle ramp up, but people are different and they behave and have different ways of dealing with things, and that's how it was. So that was quite a culture shock straight away. But as far as being in the Jehovah's Witnesses, we embraced it as kids on the whole. I think my feelings about it, like I just remember sitting at meetings, almost in pain with the anxiousness to get out and just go and play football or, see my friends feeling. Just kind of, it was palpable, but going through the motions and just doing what you're told, ultimately. Yeah. My father's quite a strong character. He was a disciplinarian before we went in to the Jehovah's Witness thing, and so you did what you were told, or there would be consequences. So that's what we did. So I think then fast forwarding, my way of dealing with things probably as a child was adapt and survive. So I kind of very quickly, I found positive reinforcement when I did the talks and the Bible studies. And if we were answering, I was getting positive reinforcement back. And so you keep doing that when you're craving attention or, whatever from family or just looking for some kind of identity. People like it when I do this, I'll keep doing this. That's how I see it now. Probably I didn't obviously have that kind of level of understanding at the time. So by 23, I found myself in a situation, and obviously from your reading of the short copy of the play, that's where the play starts at 23. I found myself in a situation where I was married to a Jehovah's Witness. We'd moved down to Devon And I was already a ministerial servant. I was on my way to being an elder. And the pressure from that quarter was growing, And I then started experiencing what I now know to be cognitive dissonance. So that's the turning point. And that's where the play kind of picks up.
What was it that made you start to feel that cognitive dissonance? Do you remember any one specific thing, or was it a general sort of gathering feeling that something wasn't right?
It was an underlying feeling that something wasn't right. It was, being completely honest, I mean, I got married at about 19 to somebody who I'd met maybe 7 months before. Obviously, there's a lot of growing confusion of feelings and so on surrounding the whole morality of the Jehovah's Witness organisation when you're younger. There is no sex before marriage. It's a very sheltered and in our case, kind of not discussed area. Nobody was talking about it, or obviously we went through the whole youth book thing and blah, 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 but I found that deeply, deeply uncomfortable.
That book is an exercise in torture.
It is. Yeah, absolutely it is. I'm glad I'm not the only one that feels like that. So now, I kind of see getting married was a combination of two things. One, the growing sexual tension and misunderstanding of my own kind of sexuality, if you like, and in order, getting married will resolve some physical need, but also I think trying to escape that kind of oppressive. I felt that getting married was also a level of where I could establish some freedom, because I lived at home right up until I was married. And that wasn't a conscious thought. That was probably what I realise now, looking back, and having debated and meditated on this and thought, well, I can see this path, and also, talking to people in terms of therapy discussions and so on. So yeah, breaking out and getting married put me into this situation where I was free to a sense, but then I had this ever-growing kind of pressure then to kind of fulfill this life that I'd created for myself. And what I realised was I didn't want that life. Yeah. So I think, getting married was one stepping stone, and moving away to Plymouth was one stepping stone to freedom. And then the cognitive dissonance started coming when, as I grew between 19 and 23, as a person, I realised I'm not who I want to be. And I don't know who I want to be. And I popped, I guess. I think probably fair to say I had the first inklings of a nervous breakdown at 23. The growing pressure of having to do something or being on a trajectory to do something you don't want to do is very damaging.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of our listeners who'd be able to relate to that. I think especially, I think on a number of levels. I mean, firstly, the getting married very young because of that combination of like wanting to be free, and also because of that, growing sexual need and everything else. I know a lot of exJWs who will relate a similar story. In fact, I know when I was a JW, I was never married as a JW, but I knew a lot of my friends when they were very young would get married at like 19, 20, 21. And at the time we'd all be like, oh, happy. And I look back now and I'm like, those people had nothing in common. And even though I know that some of those people, they had to stay together because of obviously the JWs do not allow you to divorce, except if there's, if people have been sleeping around. You just know that people aren't happy. You can see it. And I would see the deterioration in some of those relationships before I left. And it wasn't because either of them were bad people. It was just that they married the person who should have been their first boyfriend or their first girlfriend.
Exactly. That's,
what I mean?
That is a process that you go through to grow. Yeah. And it's not necessarily the right decision, in terms of a long-term partner. And you can do each other damage as well. I mean, I would say that still today I feel tremendous guilt for my ex-wife for having, married her, moved her down to Devon, and then left her effectively. She had her own very difficult path when she becoming a Jehovah's Witness anyway. And I don't really go into the marriage too much on stage because I'm only one party to that thing. And I don't have her kind of blessing or permission to use that situation for, I hesitate to say entertainment value, but certainly, it's not really fair to put that on stage. So it is very much through one lens, my play. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. Like you say, it's kind of, and this is the interesting thing about the play, because you're kind of, I love this idea that you're telling your story of leaving and all the impact it had on you, through a play. And it seems like so they sort of say so much about, great art is like taking something that was painful and then turning it into something that's, creative or inspiring or cathartic.
Yeah.
Was that, we're going to sort of come back onto, because obviously I don't want to completely spoil the play or the events of your life, but can you give us like an idea of what then happens to you? So you're 23 and you're like realizing you've got this cognitive dissonance and you start leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. What then happens to you? What's the root of your story that kind of takes you to being a performer, essentially telling your story on stage?
When I very first left, there was kind of a few months where, obviously there was a lot of pressure to go back to the marriage, which I actually did for another few months, but then left again. That was even harder to do it twice. So dealing from that second point of leaving, I moved all of my stuff and myself into a spare room of a guy I work with, and I just realized I don't know anyone, So I became quite a hermit to begin with, and it's very isolating being in that situation. And I just remember sitting in that room, a single room, which was decorated like in probably the most depressing post-70s kind of design wallpaper and flocked wallpaper and patterned floor, and just thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing?
Yeah,
is this?
I know the kind of decoration you mean. Yeah, I used to see some of that as well. Yeah.
And initially, my answer was to turn to drink, having been stopped from doing all these things for many years. I chose to then go, well, I'm out now. I'm going to indulge in everything. So I remember getting drunk on my own. I remember feeling bad about that, like this isn't the way forward. And then I got invited out to go out for a drink on the town by, of all people, my brother, who at the time was ostensibly a Jehovah's Witness as well. I should say, actually, I'm going to mention something I don't mention in the play as well. The thing that kind of really broke the connection with the Jehovah's Witnesses for me was, because obviously you've got, it's not just instant. In that period, just before going out for the first time, I actually phoned an elder. I got to such a low state, stuck in that room. I, thought I need to speak to an elder. I need to speak to one of the elders I trust. So it's only a matter of weeks, really, since I've left. And I rang through, and he said, "Oh, hi, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight." And I said, yeah, I just wondered if, I really feel like I need to talk to you. And he went, "Do you know what? I'm just preparing a talk for the introduction talk for the service meeting. Is it all right if I give you a ring tomorrow?" And I'm not being dramatic when I say that was actually an evening where it was on my mind to go to the Tamar Bridge and jump off. Yeah. And for me, I think that was the cord that severed that connection. And then I was all out, okay, I'm going to die with the rest of these people. That's what I'm going to do. So I went on that tip, and I know some don't, and I'm really glad that not everybody goes that way. But my thing was, if this world's going to go and everything's going to be destroyed with it, I don't want to live forever with those people. I'm going to go down with them, and I'll go down big. That was my way of dealing with it.
So you, at this point, you still believe the Jehovah's Witness doctrines of Armageddon. You just felt that you didn't want to actually be a part of that religion.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. I totally thought Armageddon was still coming. I just thought, I just can't live forever with these. I don't want to be a part of this. I know that sounds crazy when you think of all the things we were promised that would, why would you not want that? But it just to my core, that was not what I wanted. So I just thought, well, I'm going to roll a dice, really. That's what I'm going to do. And I think because I believed Jehovah reads hearts, he knows that I'm not into this, so I'm not going to get through anyway. That's an interesting secret dynamic inside the mind, isn't it? You're doing so well, you're going to be an elder, and you're going to do this, and inside your mind you're thinking, well, I'm not, it's all pointless because I'm not going to get through anyway, because he knows and I know that I'm not really into this, so yeah, that was my approach to it afterwards. It's just like, okay, let's get busy dying, I suppose. But the weird thing was, as I say, my brother was the one that invited me out on the town for a drink the first time. And I genuinely thought he was going to, say to me, I can't talk to you anymore. You're going to be disfellowshipped now and blah, blah, blah. But as it turns out, he was signposting me to this kind of world in Plymouth, in Devon, where the clubs were and the bars, and he literally pushed me off down the road and said, it's all down there, mate. I've got to go. I'm going to the meeting tomorrow,
Wow.
And that was probably the thing that saved my life ultimately at that point, because I couldn't have a conversation with him about suicide at that point. I wasn't that open or comfortable with feelings like that. And so that night I met somebody that I knew vaguely, and that group of people took me under their wings. So that's how I ended up in that scene.
Okay.
And regularly involved in that scene. Yeah.
Because this is during the 1990s, isn't it, when sort of clubbing and club music was really starting to come into its fore in the UK. I think if you're a certain age, I think in the 1990s in the UK or certain parts of Western Europe, you'll probably remember, even if you were a JW and you weren't going to clubs, if you're listening to this, you'll probably be aware of how much of a thing clubbing was. And so had you been much interested in kind of the clubbing scene before you started to get into it, or was this kind of your first inroad into that?
No, I'd had no interest in the clubbing scene as such. Actually, you've just brought something back to me that I'd completely forgotten. When I was auxiliary pioneering, I used to get up at 3:00 in the morning to go in to clean the escalators at Marks and Spencer's, the department store. And at that time of the morning, when I would be having breakfast, there was a thing on telly during that time called The Hitman and Her. And that was filmed at nightclubs all over, ritzy nightclubs all over the UK. So my only kind of knowledge of what was going on in clubs at that time was through that filter of The Hitman and Her with Michaela Strachan and some other guy on. So I would kind of had that very one channel view of what nightclubs were like. It was very ritzy type. But no, I had no interest in club music. I had no interest in clubbing. I had a very big interest in music. I played guitar and, had a vinyl collection and so on. And so that, music was the only kind of thing that was familiar to me when I went out there. And I liked what in some of the clubs, I liked what I was hearing. In some of them I didn't. And hence that's the story of how the path splits on my journey,
And so you end up, because one of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about, because you ended up spending some time as actually a DJ working in clubs, didn't you?
Yeah, very, very soon after leaving, I did, yeah.
Okay, so How did you get into that? Because I imagine that there's a lot of sort of ex-JWs who leave, and maybe they've got a passion for music. And as a Jehovah's Witness, they were never allowed to sort of view that as a career option or something they could get involved with. But now they've left and they're thinking, you know what? Music is something I want to do. I want to get into this. How did you sort of get into that DJ scene? And would you have any advice for anyone who's thinking of getting into it?
That's an interesting question. I think the world is a much different place now, obviously, with the advent of, because obviously in those, it was pre-internet, pre-social media, pre any type of online presence. That just didn't exist, you know. And so my way of getting in, although, you know, if somebody wanted to be in that kind of life, I guess it would work. But my way was just being invited to be a part of the periphery, you know, like doing the lights or the smoke machine and, you know, that kind of thing. And then just being, I was in the club 6 nights a week, you know, once I decided, and once I met these people, and I was there every night except Sunday nights. So when I was in there so much, it was logical that I'd start messing around with the decks and stuff. I think if people are looking to get into that kind of thing now, probably a more healthy route in, because there's a lot of negativity, you know, with that lifestyle. A more healthy route, I think, would be to focus on the musical aspect, making music and producing music, and then, you know, maybe going to local bars and venues to perform that music live, or even DJ and incorporate some of that music, but have the music as the calling card. That works better for social media, because you can share your music and build a following. But also, I think it's probably gives you a much more positive focus than just going out and getting smashed 6 nights a week. Because incidental to my becoming a DJ, I was also getting arrested, getting drunk, getting into fights, putting my fist through windows, all sorts. And that is not... that was just this inner angst and rage coming out of me in a situation where I was unable to control it once you add alcohol into that situation. And I was very depressed during that period as well. So my advice would be, go for it, but do it using the music as a vehicle, because that is a much more positive introduction to that world and that scene.
Yeah, sort of going also with your eyes open, aware of what some of the dangers that can exist in that scene, and sort of like focus on the music rather than the partying, as it were. Absolutely,
yeah. You know, you can't ever regret anything you've done, because it ultimately, whatever you've done in life, it's got you to where you are today. And if today's a good place, then, you know, then that route is a good route. But I can't overestimate how much adding alcohol in extremes to the mental conditioning and the damage caused by the Jehovah's Witness experience, the two are not really, it's not a good mix, you know. And I was anaesthetizing myself, and then in that kind of state, all the stuff was coming out. It's not a controlled way of dealing with those feelings and those emotions. Especially because you still felt at this time that you were going to die at Armageddon. So everything around you is temporary. And everyone you know is going to die, and you've got all that pressing on you. So you've got that mix of kind of all that pain and that anger and that rage, and you've also got all the alcohol, and you're also in an environment where there's a lot of people, you know, getting smashed, and that's part of the culture, and all of that for you at this time is kind of taking you down quite a toxic path. Yeah, very much so. And I think people, if they were coming out at the moment and they're listening to this and thinking, you know, what I want to do, what do I want to do? I think great, you know, get involved. You've got to have a social scene. You've got to get a support network together very quickly. And you've got to have something that you can focus and channel those emotions into, be it music, be it poetry, be it performance, be it art, painting. One thing my experience has taught me is that creative art is a great therapy, particularly if you're able to then start voicing and sharing those emotions in a controlled way. Yeah.
Could you describe us a little more with that? Because obviously you were in this place of being very unable to express what you were feeling healthily, and you've sort of transitioned now to a point where kind of, you know, healthily expressing what you feel and your experience is kind of, you know, a lot of what you actually do professionally. So how did that transition take place from the, you know, the version of you that was kind of on this downward spiral to the version of you that's standing here now, that's kind of got that healthy ability to kind of analyze your experiences through that artistic lens?
What I'm going to say now is my truth and not in any way an endorsement for the behavior that changed my situation. I just want to make that really clear. But I'd got to such a low point with the drinking, in terms of the violence, losing my driving license, losing a job, like a really good DJ job by that point, maybe 5 or 6 years in. I was easily earning £1,000 a week at that point. I ended up in a situation, and I won't say too much just because it's the play. But it was actually taking ecstasy that changed my path. And the history behind that drug, MDMA, is that it was officially, its kind of start-out point was designed to deal with depression and mental trauma. And inadvertently, that's what it did for me. And I stopped drinking overnight.
Wow.
It was instantaneous. I had that first pill experience, and it was such a contrast to the alcohol experience. I felt love and empathy for people around me. Everybody was on the same page. I felt part of something beautiful. And this is the very subtle, if you like, the very subtle crossover, the synergy between the religious experience and the ecstasy experience. They're very deliberately mirrored in my play because that's how I felt. Suddenly I felt a oneness, a connection, a part of something. Conversations were about positive, beautiful things. And also I felt a total rejection of who I'd become. I saw myself through a different lens. And that was the turning point. The caveat to that being, I am not suggesting that people in that situation should go out and start taking drugs, obviously, because it's it's illegal and can get you into a lot of trouble. But B, it's still not guided. It's still not a guided way. I mean, for me, I think I was so far down one route that I needed something huge to kick me another way. Ultimately, I went too far with that as well. And that's when I then started having to rethink my approach to my problem. But I did it with a much broader understanding of my own feelings, and that was the chemically kind of triggered thing, a sense of understanding of who I was, a sense of positive reaching for answers. So, that is what it is. But to answer your question, that was how it changed.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I've been reading up about quite a few clinical studies that have been done with people who have extreme depression or other issues, trying to sort of gently treat them with like measured doses of MDMA or other chemicals to try and impact that. And there's a lot of interesting work going on in kind of the medical use of those compounds to try and actually help people who may have, depression or other issues. And like you say, that's all going on in controlled medical measured and guided ways. Yeah. So we're not advocating that people go off and just start ingesting substances at all. But it's interesting to note that that research is going on. So it does kind of sort of jibe with what you were saying there, that experience kind of, it kind of gave you that moment of almost of self-realization.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And it's not just MDMA, like natural substances like psilocybin and ayahuasca, DMT. Nature gives us these things, and they do the same thing. And I think it's not just true of MDMA; it's true of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, by want of another phrase. That they are experimenting with those, and they're having great success in curing people from heroin addiction, alcoholism, manic depression. So it's interesting that we live in a paradigm where all those things are banned. And that's another whole debate that probably we don't have time for today. But yeah, that was the swing for me. Yeah.
Wow. So you're in that state now. So at what point what path did you go after this? Because obviously, what path did you decide, okay, I want to take my experience and actually build a stage play around it? Was that your first foray into stage writing, or had you been moving into a more kind of performance space before that?
So post my period of then going too far with the chemicals, I had a period of abstinence. Complete abstinence, 3 years, no drink, no chemicals. I was celibate, single for 3 years, all completely by design. I just thought, okay, I need to do some work. I can't keep hiding and just covering and burying this stuff. So I had this period. I stopped going to clubs. I stopped socializing with the group that I was with. And I kind of found myself in that situation again of being alone in the world, but in a much healthier place. And so rather like that first night out with my brother, when I went wandering off down Union Street in Plymouth on my own, I kind of looked on social media and thought, what's going on? And I saw this night that was advertised, which was a poetry night at a local theatre on the Barbican, and run by an organisation called Apples and Snakes in the UK, who do fantastic workshops and events. If anybody's interested in getting into that kind of thing, you can find them. It's applesandsnakes.org, I think, or .org.uk. So I went along to this night, and it was run by somebody that I knew, so that kind of helped. And I took along another friend of mine, Sebastian, and who was horrified when I told him that we were going to a poetry night. But I said to him, let's just give it a moment, it'll be fine. And the first act got up, and we were blown away. It wasn't like anything we thought it was going to be. We thought it might be a bit pretentious, a bit chin-strokey, maybe a bit unrelatable, but this new wave of spoken word is really, really powerful. Much more kind of contemporary, urban, flowing kind of style, not at all old-fashioned. And actually, case in point, by I think the third verse of the first poem, my friend Seb, who'd knocked the whole idea, was visibly emotionally moved, tears and all. And the headliner for that night was a poet called Buddy Wakefield. Now, he's 5 times world slam champion, and just, a legendary figure, and so good at what he does. So with him as the headliner and these other supporters, I came away just thinking, wow, that was a real experience, and all on soda water. So when I got home, I thought, do you know what? I used to love poetry when I was at school. I can remember winning a competition kind of in, the secondary school. And so I wrote this poem. It kind of came very easily. And I sent it to the woman, Katie, who was hosting the night. And she immediately came back on Facebook and said, wow, I didn't know you was a poet. That's amazing. I love it. You're on next month. So here I am again, like plunged headfirst into something.
Hello, deep end.
Yeah, exactly. And she gave me a quarter of an hour set the following month. I had 1 3-minute poem. And so over that month, I wrote more poems until I had 15 minutes worth of poetry, and obviously using the proper theocratic school method of practicing and timing, and and I will say this, that stuff that we learn actually has held me in very good stead. So not everything is a negative. It's easy to jump on the negatives all the time, but I was not too nervous about getting up on that platform at the theatre. I knew how to use a mic. I came across very professional, I can tell you. And I will thank the Theocratic Ministry School for that publicly. And that was it. I was off. So me being me, it wasn't long before I launched a new light in Plymouth and had people coming down as guest DJs, guest poets, and just developing my own style. And I started entering slam competitions, winning slam competitions, ended up at the Royal Albert Hall in London last year for the UK slam finals, which I didn't get through to the final, but I really enjoyed the whole experience. So that was the poetry side. And then I went to Edinburgh in 2016 for the Edinburgh Fringe.
Could you just explain to us, for our listeners, what the Edinburgh Fringe is? Because this is a very famous festival in the arts and creative world, but people worldwide might not have heard of this Fringe before. So could you give us just a quick summary of what the Edinburgh Fringe is?
Of course, yeah. So the city of Edinburgh in Scotland is basically taken over for the entire month by comedians, theatre makers, poets, performers, street performers. The size of the city swells from its standard size to 1.5 million people for that month. You literally cannot move on the streets. It's a carnival atmosphere. It's incredible. It's really a must do, in life. Put it on your list to do. What you will find is 2,500 shows every day.
Wow. Happening
from about 10 in the morning till, through to the early hours of the following morning. There are 2,500 shows a day. So that's the scale of it. It's like nothing else I've ever experienced, So I went along with the idea of seeing what it was all about. I'd kind of heard about it through the comedy and so on. I'd always wanted to go. And I went along, and I... interestingly, the second thing that coming to good stead for me is I went flyering for other shows. So basically, street witnessing, I guess. Approaching people in the street and, selling them in 30 seconds the concept of the show. Not taking no for an answer. I mean, it's everything you could dream of.
Nice, yeah. All these kind of poacher turned gamekeeper JW skills coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a ninja at it as well, and consequently, the last 2 years have been really sought after, and earned quite a lot of money, and got my festival funded by doing this flyering work 3 or 4 hours a day, and then seeing shows, the rest of the day. And I saw. I'd seen a show by a guy called Rob G called Forget Me Not, which was or is a verse play about it's an Alzheimer's whodunit So it's set.
Okay.
Yeah, it's setting in a nursing home with characters that are suffering Alzheimer's, and a murder happens, and then it's a whodunit. But obviously, the guy is a retired detective, and he has Alzheimer's. So there's all kinds of. It's fraught with all kinds of problems, and I just found it amazing. There was this guy doing 7 characters on his own on stage for an hour, using a mixture of poetry and narrative. I'd never experienced anything like it, and I was like, wow, now this is taking the whole thing to the next level. I want to do this. And I saw more shows in Edinburgh like that. Luke Wright was another guy that does very similar verse play type format. And so I came away from there thinking, okay, I'm going to write a show, and that's going to be my target now. So that's what started me off writing an hour show. But I'd never done anything like that before, no. I mean, up to that point, I'd done a 15-minute set reading from a book.
Cool. So it was quite an ambitious thing then to sort of transition from the 15-minute set to sort of, you're going to write the whole show. How did you go about writing it? Did you know instantly what your show was going to be about, that experience you'd had leaving the JWs and then kind of having that moment of realization? Was that the first idea that came to you, or did you have some other ideas for that show first?
I wrote a poem called 1 Foot in the Rave. When I thought about doing the show, I looked at the poem and I thought, it'd be really cool to maybe break that poem into sections and do a whole show about rave culture. I use Ableton Live. Something we haven't touched on is that I'd become a music producer during the rave period as well. I'm proficient with a studio, and I can make noises. Some of them are nice. So I thought it'd be good to mix the two. That was the initial concept. And I was working with that idea, and really, to be honest with you, getting nowhere fast. I kind of couldn't quite see a clear way to do this, and I had a couple of experimental ideas that I just didn't like them. And then I was supporting a poet called Attila the Stockbroker, who came down to Plymouth, and a friend of mine, Tom, invited me to do a warm-up, and Attila came to stay with me, and we ended up sitting up all night, and I told him this story. It was kind of an interesting thing for both of us, really, because he was in the punk scene, I was in the rave scene. To him, the rave scene was what killed the punk scene. So it was we were very engaged with the whole subject, but I started at the beginning and told him the whole story from the Jehovah's Witness experience onwards. And after about 4 hours of talking, he looked at me and he said, "So that's your Edinburgh show, right? Tell me that's your Edinburgh show." And the light bulb came on. I was like, of course it is. Why didn't I think of that? Probably because I had some feeling of shame, or, I don't want people to know that. I kind of want to do the cool thing and talk about DJing, but it makes total sense to do this show. So that's why I then approached the idea with the idea of it being the transition and the story. And then it just flowed. And I wrote an early version, which I sent to my editor, Tina Sederholm, who's an incredibly talented poet and editor. And she sent it back and said, "Hey, that bit's great, but maybe, do this, do that." And so I reapproached it from a screenplay perspective. I'd read a book on screenplay writing, and I took all the beat points of a screenplay and put them into this show and rewrote it and kind of mapped it out and sent it back to her, and she said, "Yeah, that's it. Brilliant, you've got it." So that was the show. I wrote that from January to March last year in Spain. I was staying over there for a few months, and then I came back, and I had my first date booked at the Plymouth Fringe, which was at a theatre, the Barbican Theatre, actually, the one that I'd been to all that time before. And it's, lo and behold, it sold out, 100 people. So I then had from March to May to learn it. and I locked myself away in the basement of my house and just presented it to the walls. No director, no stage understanding, no understanding of how to be an actor, and just kept trying things that I thought might work, but too shy to do it in front of everybody or anybody to get any feedback, but got to do it to 100 people in May. And that's what I did. And it was terrifying. On the night, kind of the audience, there's no feeling like people just filing in and filling up seats, and any kind of cockiness about, oh, that's all right, I've used a microphone before, was way out the window by this point, I can tell you. All I was thinking is, what have I done? This is either going to go really well and I'm going to love it, or it is going to be singly the most excruciating, embarrassing situation for everyone in the room, and I'm going to disappear, never to be seen again. It went okay, and it won an award, actually. So, that was just the endorsement and the encouragement and that I needed, really, to spur me on. And so I fully embraced that and then started booking more shows and building it up, ready for the, kind of a bigger tour. And that's kind of where I find myself today, is in the process of producing and putting together this tour. Yeah. And performing, of course. I've got dates already, but it's quite a lot to do all of it.
So where are you touring at the moment? Because you've got like a series of dates planned out, haven't you? And I think, did you say you're going to the Edinburgh Fringe again?
Yeah, I'm doing a full month this year. Yeah. Last year I did a sample run of 8 nights just to give myself the experience. I come across as being very, I can do anything, but I'm really not like that. And I was wise enough to realise, having been flying at Edinburgh Fringe Festival, that I probably shouldn't go over and do a whole month without the experience. So I thought I'll book 8 nights and see how it goes. And that went well. So really the focus from there was, okay, let's build a tour, including a full month of Edinburgh. And that I'm booked into that at the end of this year. In June, I'm doing the North Devon Fringe Theatre Fest. I'm doing the Morecambe Fringe. I'm doing the Theatre Royal in Plymouth, which is fantastic. And then Edinburgh full month. And then I'm in Leicester and Loughborough. I'm upstairs at the Westin in Leicester in September, and Loughborough, the Blue Monkey in Loughborough the week after. And at the moment, those are the dates that are firm. But I'm trying to fill out the Midlands and the South East. The thing that I found is there's been such a wonderful response. And I have to say, when I was in Edinburgh last year and I did my 7 nights, a lot of people came because they'd been to see Daniel's film.
Apostasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they saw the flyer. I've changed the flyer slightly in the blurb that you read. It said evangelist preacher, but I do actually name Jehovah's Witnesses now.
Okay.
And that connection obviously dropped. We did a little bit of flyering at Daniel's film showing in Edinburgh, and people came down, and so that's great that Daniel did that work, because I think it's really opened the door for discussion. And a lot of people have come to the show and said, hey, we're really interested in this. A lot of people equally have come to have a go at me,
really
saying that advocating rave culture and drug taking, and and they feel that the imagery is blasphemous on the flyer. There's 2 schools of people that come. But everybody so far that has come along to the show has left with a positive experience. I'm sure there'll be at some point somebody's probably offended by the by the flyer, which is
because on the flyer, if I just describe it, is that the one you're talking about where they've got the picture of it's the artwork, I don't know the artist, of it's Jesus reclining in a crucified position, but he's got the kind of the ecstasy smiley face.
Yeah, it's basically a Renaissance painting, but there's lots of layers to why I chose this. There used to be a club night called Renaissance that used to use that style of painting on their album covers. So that's an in reference for people that know the culture. Also, there's a dove in that painting, and doves were one of the first pills. So, there's lots of little subtle ins that I thought were just very clever. But obviously, somebody just looking at it just found it offensive. That's completely fine. People can find offensive what they want. Yeah. But the idea of the acid house face, the yellow acid house face, the smiley over Jesus's face, is not meant to be provocative in that sense. But it's just that kind of, we wear many faces when we're seeking redemption. And if you wanted to go a level deeper, then the idea of Jesus being a white Westerner, which is what he is in that painting, is ridiculous. So, that's a cartoon, and there's another cartoon layer on it. What's the real the real situation, And the real situation is the journey we have with ourselves, and that ultimately is what the play is about.
Well, that's what it's interesting when we're talking about that. One of the things I learned, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I was very easily offended by art that I considered blasphemous. And one of the kind of the joys I've discovered in leaving is if you your reaction to artwork is something you should analyze. And if you do find something offensive, well, maybe try and find out what was the art, what was the artist trying to do? What's he trying to convey? What are the layers going on? Why am I offended by this? Can I use this as an insult into how an insight into how I react to things? One of the as a slight digression, one of the wonderful things since leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel free that I don't have to analyze art now through a very narrow lens of what isn't acceptable. You're free to kind of like really engage with art as it's presented on this wide spectrum. Your reactions are still okay because, ultimately, art is always a subjective medium. But you really are kind of free to engage with things in a way that, as a Jehovah's Witness, when you're told, well, this is right, this is wrong, this is blasphemous, this is forbidden, that very narrow corridor kind of opens up into this wide landscape.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. Good art is supposed to evoke a reaction. It doesn't necessarily follow that reaction in you should always be positive. And I think you're right. If you have a negative reaction to something, that is perfect because the artist is asking you to look at you. Yeah. Why, like you said, why do you feel like that? What is your preconditioning or your belief structure? The thing is, we live in an echo chamber social media society now. All we're looking for is likes, shares, retweets, endorsements, positive little hearts on your Instagram. And that isn't how the world is, So, art should be divisive, and we have the right, and it's perfectly okay to be offended. You've nailed a very important point there, is if we are, then why is that the case? Is what I'm feeling actually a real feeling? Yeah. Or is that feeling that somebody's told me to have, or I just believe to be the case?
Have you had many exJWs attend the performances? And if so, have you got any feedback from them? What have they said?
Yeah. In fact, a whole group came on the last night in Edinburgh, including my parents, of course.
I was going to ask you about this, yeah.
A guy called Nick up in Edinburgh arranged an ex-Jehovah's Witness meetup at that event, and it was great. And it's one of the things I want to do moving forward, and one of the things I'm really excited to talk to anyone who is interested in this concept is I'd like to do some workshops in towns with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and anybody who feels like they've been a victim of coercive control of any kind. I'd like to do creative workshops and have a time and a space where I can spend more time interacting, because post-show is a really difficult time. You have an adrenaline crash. You've just had a very high level of anxiety for an hour. So it's not always the best time to meet people, is what I'm saying. I have done a Q&A a few shows, and that's been really nice. because that's kind of like giving a little decompression. I'm really interested in talking to anybody who's interested in putting a show on in their town, with maybe a creative workshop or some kind of workshop facilitation, in order to that people can come and express their stories.
Yeah, one of the things that's very healing for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses is to talk to other ex-JWs about experiences. And one of the amazingly positive things we're seeing is that there is more and more media and film and art related towards the ex-JW or the JW experience. I mean, Daniel's film, Apostasy, has had a huge response from ex-JWs, I think, not just because it is kind of educating the general public on some of the issues that the JW doctrines raise, but also just because it's putting that experience out there that people can relate to. And I think people find it very healing and very affirming and very cathartic. And I'm sure the same is true when a former Jehovah's Witness sees your performance and sees your play. That same resonance of like, I've had these experiences, I felt these things. That's what I've gone through too. And for some people, it's the first time they've ever seen that from another person. And that ability to talk to other people who've gone through the same thing and have that experience, and also sometimes see the little differences in experiences as well. It's an incredibly, I think, a very healing and cathartic thing for former Jehovah's Witnesses.
I think, again, we live in a world now where connection and communication is a lot easier. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, I've only recently discovered all of the exJW forums and so on, largely because I started to hear my father and my brother talking about them as they went through their process much more recently. And yeah, I mean, obviously that's a fantastic thing that is available to people nowadays, but you can't be that more intimate kind of one-to-one or one-to-group energy and dynamic where people can feel like they have more opportunity to really connect with people, and they're not just part of the whole noise that's going on. And I think it is important to remind ourselves about the echo chamber as well, because, you know, it could be, it's very easy to go all into something else, that you've got to expose yourself to all kinds of scenarios and situations where you can really test and, you know, get to know what it is that your true core is all about.
Yeah, I think also, I think one thing that hearing you speak about your own experiences is one thing an ex-Jehovah's Witness needs to bear in mind, especially if they've just left, is that even if they don't realize it, they're probably carrying quite a lot of damage and quite a lot of emotional pain and stress. And rather than ignoring that, or like you say, trying to like drink it or partying it away, as soon as possible, try and, you know, there's counseling, there's therapy. There are ways to process those emotions healthily. And I think, because I know from my own experience of leaving, I thought I was fine. And it's only in the last couple of years I've realized actually I kind of wasn't fine. I had a lot of stuff I wasn't dealing with. And the stuff I wasn't dealing with was actually starting to get quite unpleasant and toxic. And so I've started to deal with things and I'm feeling a lot better. But I think that's listening to the kind of the journey you went through. You obviously were carrying all this damage, and it wasn't until you were able to have that self-realization and start to process what you were going through that you really started to heal from the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't until I met some people, or specifically two people in the rave scene that were a little bit older than me. I'm the oldest child in our family. And so to have an older brother figure, people that were doing very well with their lives and actually opened the door to self-analysis. I was given a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello, which is a really, really powerful book. It was the first time I'd started talking about spirituality again, and talking about sense of purpose and, you know, what is all this about, and actually taking that lid off again, which is actually kind of another turning point, is like when you start to think, oh my goodness, I'm not slipping back into, because for me, you go through a curve of, I went out and then I was like, no, there is no God, there is nothing, you know, we're all doomed, it's just evolution, get over it kind of thing, you know, through to, you know, kind of that I'm not really having a good time here. Something needs to change, through to why is it that this is happening? What is experience all about? What is reality? What is consciousness? Through to maybe there's something higher, and I don't mean necessarily, the idea of a monotheistic culture or a god or anything like that. But this is happening to all of us at the same time. It's about something, and that kind of process does open up very interesting pathways again. You're like, okay, so I'm here, and there's about probably 25, 30 years of usable life left from where I'm standing. So what am I going to do with that? And that's the process I now find myself in.
That's interesting to hear you say that, because there's a previous podcast, myself and Alice Cheshire, we were discussing some of the factors involved in people who report subjective happiness. So people who when they do sort of tests and interviews, the people who usually have the highest kind of, they feel happy or contented, there's a number of factors in common, and one of them is purpose. People who feel that they have a purpose tend to score higher on a subjective happiness. And that's one of the things, is like when you leave with the Jehovah's Witnesses, you had a purpose when you were a JW, and then when you leave, the temptation is to kind of think, oh, life is purposeless and pointless, and what's the point? And I think I'd agree, it's really important to sort of analyze, okay, what, like you say, we've all got a certain amount of time, so what are we going to do with it? How are we going to spend it? Where are we going to focus it? Because it's even more precious now, in a way, if it's not everlasting life, if it's only a few decades. Well, what are you going to do with it? Because, the most valuable thing you have is your time, Absolutely. And it's those realizations that really start to focus your thinking and to stir your inner kind of emotions and really make you evaluate. Time is one of the most important things. A sense of belonging is a natural human instinct, that kind of pack instinct. So who's my tribe? And, what is my role? What is it I'm going to do? What is my core purpose? And that's, for me, where art and creativity and music and writing, those things are when I feel most me. And I think, that this is true of anybody, regardless of their history, ex-Jehovah's Witness or not. There's people that go through their life on the machine. They do school, they qualify, they do further education, they do the career path, they do the successful things all the way through to retirement. They give up work, and then at some point after that, they drop. Well, if their fulfillment is through that's fantastic. But there are lots of people who don't fit that traditional or expected role path, and that's I find myself in that group. I literally cannot hold a job down. I've had more jobs than I can to remember. How does one kind of find out who they are? That's a very interesting challenge, and something that faces anybody, regardless of their background. But that is the beauty of this experience we're having, and it's not always up. You've got to experience. If you didn't have lows, then how would you know highs? The dynamic range of your lowest low and your highest high might be different from person to person. Some people might live a very ambient kind of, very gentle up and down. Other people, like myself, might peak and trough at the extremes. But, ultimately, your sense of measurement is between those 2 points. So, have you had the best yet? Maybe not. That's where I think art and music and culture and all those kind of ideas have really come into play. One thing that I really found useful, that I was terrified of because of the whole programming of the demons thing, is meditation. Meditation is just essentially, it's just stopping and thinking. So it's pretty obvious why it's not, why it's frowned upon, isn't it? Don't stop and think. Whatever you do, don't let them think.
But joking aside, that is something that is can be as powerful as any induced experience in terms of switching off that noise and actually connecting with the real you. And I entered the idea of meditation with great trepidation because I thought I was instantly going to be possessed, of course. And of course you realise that it's just not about that. And yoga and breathing and meditation, for me, were far more powerful and helpful than any of the other experiences I've had. Let's put it that way. Yeah. A really healthy thing to do.
I think that's actually it's just a sort of you've been very generous with your time, especially for someone who's currently had a tooth ripped out. So I don't want to keep you for much longer, but I would agree. I think we've mentioned on this podcast before meditation, breathing, and yoga. These things are. I've personally found, I haven't tried much yoga yet because I'm incredibly unflexible, but meditation I've been really getting into. I do sort of mindfulness meditation. I try to do it every morning. And it really is, and like you say, it's just stopping and thinking and being in the moment. And you realise, for me especially, I realised how little I was doing that. And actually how difficult it was for me to do at first. And it's almost like you kind of, it's like muscles that you haven't used for a very long time. You need to get them back into shape. But once you've done it, it's incredibly calming. And I can tell the days when I've been able to do it in the morning, I can tell I have a better day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Anthony de Mello Awareness book is a perfect book for any ex-Jehovah's Witness to have a read of. It doesn't pull any punches, but it really starts that idea of looking at yourself. And what you realise through meditation and, turning that noise off, we spend our entire day on the back foot reacting to emotions and things that actually, they're not really who we are.
Yeah.
We're reacting to preconditioned kind of behaviours and so on, and then we're going along with them. Whereas if you can, I suppose the easiest way to explain it very quickly is just if you can learn to start looking at yourself as if you're a camera on the wall and looking at yourself and going, look at him, why is he doing that? That kind of childish tantrum thing, what's that all about? Okay. It's fine to let it run through you. It's a feeling. It's valid. But don't react to it. Yeah, I found that to be hugely beneficial. Highly recommended.
Like I said, you've been very, very generous with your time, and especially with a missing tooth. If people want to find out more about you, where are you online? Where can they find out more about yourself and your show?
Okay, yeah. So I'm on Twitter as @JoinedUpPoetry. And I'm on Instagram as Alexander Rhodes Poet, RHODES. And I do have a website as well, alexanderrhodes.me.uk. And those are probably the best channels. I don't do Facebook. #OneFootInTheRave and exJW are the two tags I use about the show. So if you want to come along to the show, then those are probably the things that will help you find a show in your town. Or do you know what, if you want to put a show on in your town and you're kind of into that kind of thing and you like promoting, or you've got an interest in theatre, we can work on it together. We can put a show on in your town. I'll come and do it in your town, and maybe get some other local poets or something involved to do a warm-up.
Cool.
I'm very open to all of that.
Fantastic. So Alexander Rhodes, aka Sean Holland, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks.